friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM channel 130. Of course, our radio show is also a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org or directly to wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Mary Fiorito.
And we are thrilled to welcome back to the show with us the Honorable Congressman Chris Smith from the great state of New Jersey. And we're very excited to have him with us because he was just awarded the Christe Fidelis Laici Award at the 2025 National Catholic Prayer Breakfast last week. And it was a much-deserved honor for you, Congressman, for all your work for life, for the church, for religious freedom, and so much more. So welcome to the show, Congressman.
Ashley, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
So, Congressman, the thing that I was there and Mary was there, and we got to witness firsthand your very inspiring speech. And the thing that I was struck by was your theme of we don't have time for idleness. And that just seems to be so resonant today. We have so much work to do, but tell us more. What did you mean by that?
Well, every single day there are many children who are killed by abortion. The other side on the whole culture of death they're incredibly aggressive, and they never stop. And we have to be equally aggressive, but benignly so, with no hate, no malice towards them or anyone else. As the gospel just 2 weeks ago, Luke 6, as I pointed out in my comments, it couldn't have been more timely to love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. And the hate that I get, the hate that the church gets, the hate that our bishops get, or you get, everyone gets from these people is unconscionable. But we got to use that almost like judo to work even harder to try to end the culture of death and have a culture of life. There's too many children who are being slaughtered, 66 million and counting in this country alone. And as I pointed out, that's more than every man, woman, and child living in the country of France. That is just a whole country obliterated, the equivalent of through abortion. It's a weapon of mass destruction. And what it does to women, my wife and I have been in the pro-life movement since 1972. New Jersey was on the possibility of going the way of New York and legalizing abortion back then. We were in college, and we formed the pro-life group there. And to me, the pregnancy care centers, which was always part of all of our message and the church's message, as well as Project Rachel, to help women who have aborted, is all about loving the woman, saying, there is an alternative, and the alternative is life for you and for your baby or babies if you happen to be carrying twins. And so the urgency is overwhelming. And I would hope that everybody would get that sense that we have no luxury of idleness, which is, again, what Pope John Paul II, St. John Paul II's admonition was all about. He also called for all of us to get involved in the public square, to be involved with politics. Yes, it's a sordid business in many, many ways. Get involved and make it something other than that, but also defend life as effectively as we all can at every level. So, and the church, I can't say enough. When I was executive director of the New Jersey Right to Life Committee in the 1970s, learned that without the church, and that includes the Knights of Columbus and our bishops and our priests, there would have been no pro-life movement, and there wouldn't be one today. Our church has been amazing. And John Paul II, St. John Paul II, when I quoted him about, just the importance of never quitting, never stopping in the pursuit of protection. And it's all about protection of the weakest and most vulnerable.
Yeah, Congressman Smith, I had the great privilege of working for both the late Cardinal Joseph Bernardine, who developed the consistent ethic of life, and then Cardinal George, who was president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. And I had the privilege of being with Cardinal George on the stage at the March for Life one year. And it was a leading evangelical who came over to him and said, I just need to tell you that God's convicted me to tell you this, that the Catholic Church, we have let the Catholic Church carry the heavy water for a long time on this issue. And we are so grateful to you. And he repeated just what you just said. If there was no Catholic Church, there'd be no no pro-life movement in this country.
Oh, what a great message. Cardinal George was just amazing too. I mean,
He
we've had
was.
so many great leaders, and they just, I mean, the Bishop of New York, Bishop O'Connor.
O'Connor, yes.
I got to know him, and he was just, I remember at a big march, it was not the March for Life, but the one that National Right to Life did in response to the other one that was done by the other side, and there were about 500,000 people at this march. It was in the springtime. And he turned to all the media and says, "Thanks for being here. I see you all out there. We never see it on the news."
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Washington Post put that particular one, that march, you know, on C1 or C3 or something. You know, the other march had before, day of, and day after coverage. I mean, the bias of the legacy media is just appalling. And that does a disservice, again, to the victims, the mother and babies who are being slaughtered by these abortionists.
Well, I was so grateful to hear you just mention pregnancy resource centers
Yes.
and crisis pregnancy centers, because obviously, there are thousands of pregnancy centers for every couple hundred of abortion clinics, which your Democratic colleagues seem to think is a problem and a threat. I'm living in Chicago, and right after the Democratic National Convention this past summer, we had one of our pregnancy center and maternity homes very badly vandalized that evening after Kamala Harris's acceptance speech. Why do you think there is this sort of negative focus on the pregnancy centers, given it, we're putting our money where our mouth is to help women? And what have you seen in Congress in terms of legislative action that might affect the centers?
Well, there's been an all-out push by certain members of the House and Senate to delegitimize them, to suggest that somehow they don't tell the truth. I mean, I have known the pregnancy centers going back to Birthright, when Marie and I first, Louise Summerhill founded Birthright in Canada, and then it's become so many great other pregnancy care centers and networks here and around the world. Those women, and it's almost all women who run them, there's a few men involved,
right?
They are amazing, selfless, very, very smart. And they tell the truth to the woman. And as more of them get ultrasound technology, and the Knights of Columbus has been doing that very, very effectively, you get a situation where once the woman sees the baby, and if she's got her boyfriend or husband there, they often have the same reaction. Oh, God, I'm not going to be a parent. I am a parent right now. And here's the little child looking up at me, sucking his or her thumb, whatever it might be at the age of gestation. And they are all against it. And, they're driven by Planned Parenthood. The Biden White House was a wholly owned subsidiary of Planned Parenthood. They've done over 10 million abortions. They do about 400,000 every year. They lie about all kinds of issues. They did it on partial birth. They said it was rare, less than 500 per year. In one clinic in New Jersey, they were doing about 1,800 a year. And that was broken by a very liberal paper, the Bergen Record. So they just don't tell the truth. And they're against women's right to know laws. They're against waiting periods, parental notification statutes, and parental involvement statutes. And of course, they are for abortion right up until the moment of birth. And they're not for the Born Alive Act. So if a child does survive a late-term abortion, he or she gets care that is commensurate with what you would get for any other preemie, that, very similar. And that did pass the House. It didn't pass the Senate again. So, and we do have that on the books, but it's not enforceable the way we would like, which is why the new effort. But Planned Parenthood's there, and they have waged war against pregnancy care centers. It takes away their business. Most people don't realize it's a big business, and they don't do a very good job. Look at the New York Times piece about the botched abortions and women getting so hurt. We've known that, but now some of it's starting to trickle out. One of the big scandals is that with Planned Parenthood, all the clinics, not just theirs, there's no reporting. The CDC, I'll never forget it, Willard Cates, who ran the CDC 40 years ago or so, there was a big piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer called The Dreaded Complication. And what it was all about was that he goes, why is there no reporting? Do you think any clinic is going to report? It's like turning yourself into the IRS. You're going to be audited. You'll be looked at. And with Gosnell, who was in Philadelphia, the same place as the Philadelphia Inquirer, he killed women. He killed children by snipping, as he called them. And he would sever their spinal cords. This is barbaric. This is not medicine. This is child abuse. And those who are promoting it are child predators. What's the difference between that and going into a preemie ward and killing the kids, slitting their throats? That's what Gosnell did. That's what the abortion mills do. The pregnancy care centers are not judgmental. They exist to serve and to love both of them, mother and baby, and they do an amazing job. So we have in my own state, Josh Gottheimer has gone to several, member of the House, trying to shut him down. He wants ready for governor. Our governor Murphy wants to shut him down. Our attorney general wants to shut him down. They harass them, and they also seek to get rid of them. Thank God they're there. They're just an amazing group of people, and it's growing worldwide. I've been at openings of pregnancy care centers in Macedonia, in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, all over the world, and they save women and babies, and they do it even after the baby's born. They're there, and some of the people who actually are helped end up being volunteers, if not paid staff, sometime later on, because they know if it wasn't for this center, my child or children would have been dead.
Congressman, you've mentioned Planned Parenthood, and there seems to be a unique opportunity here in that we have an administration. I mean, they editorialized in the pages of the Wall Street Journal and included Planned Parenthood among those entities, corrupt entities that should be defunded. They've shown extraordinary courage in trying to stop sending taxpayer dollars to corrupt things that are not in American interest. From your vantage point, is there any possibility that Planned Parenthood would no longer be the recipient of the hundreds of millions, billions? I don't even know how much money it is. Where does that stand, and how?
Well, it's a great question, and we are trying to defund them. Trump did try to do it last time. My belief is that with the reconciliation bill, where you don't need 60 votes in the Senate, you only need a simple majority, we do have a good opportunity to put that into the reconciliation bill. Again, filibuster is what has prevented a lot of our pro-life bills from going forward. I offered the H.R. 7, I have it in right now again, no taxpayer funding for abortion, makes permanent Hyde, everything else, my amendment to the Federal Employees Health Benefits Plan, which has been in effect since 1984, and it would take abortion out of Obamacare. We can't get it out of the Senate. And so it's passed here over and over again, but we don't have 60 votes. With the reconciliation legislation, which is designed to reduce debt, and it does not have a requirement of a simple majority is all you need. You don't need the 60 votes. So my hope is, and our speaker, Mike Johnson, who's a very pro-life and principled and smart lawmaker, leader, he wants it defunded, and we have talked and spoken many times. We did a letter from a number of us asking our leadership to make sure that the defunding of Planned Parenthood is tried very hard through the reconciliation process. So that's coming up. It's all imminent. It's all happening right now, and hopefully Doge will look at it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I raised it in a conference meeting with what's his name, the head of Doge.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, Elon Musk. And I asked him, I said, and I reminded him, 10 million dead babies and counting. Globally, they're a menace to children and mothers. I call them Child Abuse Incorporated. And they'll probably sue me someday. Good, let's get in court and argue this out. What do you do in your clinics? Right. You dismember and you chemically poison and you starve children to death. Isn't that? It's a frightening reality that they are all about. And David DeLion broke the case on what they do in doing certain types of abortions in order to procure body parts of children in the womb, in order to sell them and to make money, livers and other things. I mean, that's right out of Joseph Mengele in the Nazi Germany. And I'm not kidding or exaggerating. I can't believe that this has been allowed to go on. I'm all for organ donation when you have informed consent. If I get hit by a car tomorrow, my eyes are going to, that type of thing, but not involuntarily taking a child and then doing the abortion in a way more likely to get a specimen that is more usable for either research or for transplantation. We learned with fetal tissue years ago that they're doing abortions in a way that would be more likely to get fetal tissue and brain tissue of a victim called an unborn child for transplant. And I talked on the floor of the House several times about that. And fetal transplantation and fetal tissue turned out to be a bust in terms of its efficacy because it morphed into tumors, but it was still, had it worked, you would have all these people saying, oh, we need this for Parkinson's. When they transplanted, even the New York Times did a piece on this, into the brains of individuals, it became horribly, it morphed into all kinds of other things. It was absolutely not curative. So it kind of put a halt on that. But it's, why does it take that? These are kids, and they can't be victimized like that. And at all. Love them. Make sure, I'm a big proponent of the first 1,000 days of life. I've got legislation passed from conception to the second birthday. Food, nutrition, things like folic acid to mitigate the occurrence of spina bifida, and as well as autism. I chair the Autism Caucus, and I've written 5 laws on autism, including the most recent called the Autism Cares Act of 2024, $2 billion for autism. There's no doubt that interventions like that are benign and healthy, folic acid and the like, can lessen the prevalence of both autism as well as spina bifida. So that's where we should be putting our focus and our money, and not the better way of killing a baby. I remember watching a speech that was given by the doctor, if you want to call him that developed the partial birth abortion method, where the baby's brains are literally sucked out. And he was talking to a bunch of doctors and other so-called healthcare practitioners. And when he said, now we've effectuated fetal demise, they all broke into applause. Applause from hell. How could you do that to a child? And when we had the debates on the floor of the House, I'm pointing because I'm in the Capitol, right across the street here, you had people defending that as choice. And I even said in one of my debates, because we have 2 girls that are grown, they have their own kids. I said if my daughter had a doll and she was playing with her doll, and all of a sudden she does a partial birth abortion on the child and sucks their brains out, we'd go to the psychiatrist immediately. There's a problem here. And yet this was accepted by the Biden administration. They were all for it, but especially Obama and Clinton during those years, because it's choice to slaughter a baby by sucking their brains out. So, and Planned Parenthood and company were all in favor of that as well.
Well, what kind of baffles me, Congressman, is that when you poll the American people on things like publicly funded abortion, the vast majority of Americans, like 75 to 80%, oppose public funding of abortion, and they see it as what it is, which is an elective procedure. It is not necessary. It's not healthcare, period, and it's elective. And we don't pay for we don't pay for plastic surgery for people with federal funding or anything like that. So it seems to me so inconsistent with what the general public wants, right? And that's what the Democrats always claim to represent, is the general public and, the little guy. But, I was so struck during your remarks at the Catholic prayer breakfast, not only obviously your commitment to protecting the unborn is so well known, but I didn't realize you were so deeply involved in issues of religious liberty. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you've done that arena?
In 1981, I read a book called Torture for Christ. It was by Richard Wurmbrand, who was horribly tortured, as were other Christians and Catholics, in Romania. And Nicholas Ceausescu was the dictator. And I remember I read it. Then I read several other books about religious prisoners, and got convicted. I got to work on this. So I began working on Romania, the East Bloc countries, the Soviet Union, traveled to camps, including Perm Camp 35, where many religious and political prisoners were being held in the Ural Mountains. Began working on in China, and the attacks on believers it's very widespread. In China, they attacked the underground and all Christians. It used to be just the underground. Now it's everybody. There was some tolerance for the patriotic church. That's all gone now too. They go after the Uyghurs, the Muslims, and I've had hearings on that. I've tried to go there. Chinese Communist Party said, anybody wants to come here can come. I chair the China Commission. So I wrote letter after letter, and I'm still doing it. I'd like to lead a delegation to Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are being put into concentration camps because of their faith, because they are Muslims. And we stand in solidarity for religious freedom for all. And my first trip was to the Soviet Union in '83 on behalf of Soviet Jews. And I've worked on that ever since. And of course, the attacks on Christians. In Nigeria, and I've been there many times, I didn't get into this because I just ran out of time, but I met with a man, Archbishop Pegama, who's one of the most, again, another one of our wonderful, wonderful leaders in the church. He had many of his churches firebombed by Boko Haram. We met with survivors and others, and, the resilience is just unparalleled, but also the sorrow. Then I met with a man named Habila. The Boko Haram radical terrorist Islamists came to his home, pulled him out of his house, his wife screaming, please, don't hurt my husband, threw him to the ground with an AK-47, put it right by his mouth, and said, "You renounce your faith." He was a Christian, very active. Or we'll blow your brains out. Become a Muslim right here. And he says, "I'm ready to die for my Lord." And they gave him a second question, and then they pulled the trigger when he repeated. When I met him at an IDP camp in Jos, brought him over here for testimony, and you could have heard a pin drop. He was courageous, a survivor, miraculously, and he talked about how know Jesus Christ first. Fight all of these things, but God is the great liberator and the great love of our lives. And my favorite writer is Bishop Fulton Sheen. I've read almost all of his books, and I loved it when he says we're all kings and queens in exile. In one of his books, Footprints in a Darkened Forest, Go to Heaven, which he says, worst thing you can say to anybody is go to hell. Worst thing, say go to heaven. And he starts off by saying, "Go west, young man," was the admonition decades ago. And he says, change your thoughts and say, even for your worst enemy, go to heaven. And so then I met with this Bishop Shu of Baoding province. He had been in the prisons for like 30 years. And he said mass for my small delegation in a very small apartment in Beijing. And we're pushing the Russians, the Chinese, pushing them hard. Please ease up on the faithful, please. And, under the current guy, Xi Jinping, he's the worst we've ever seen since Mao Zedong. But in our conversation, which lasted about an hour and a half or so, I was with the Cardinal Kung Foundation. They're just wonderful. Joseph Kung, I traveled with him, other great believer, a Catholic believer. So long story short, he says, "I love my enemies. I pray for those who torture and persecute me." And I'm looking at him, and I said this in my comments the other day. I get upset when I get a bad editorial, and I get a lot of them, particularly on the life issue. When the 30-second ads start every campaign, and they paint a caricature that is just awful. Right now there's a fake X account in my name. It's like it's me, and it's not. And I'm saying, we can't get them to take it down. I've met with the ex executives, and it's just terrible. So that gets me. But I have to overcome it. And my wife who's the love of my life. We've been married for 47 years. She has just known each other for over 50. We met in the pro-life movement, by the way. We just keep bringing it back to the Lord, and saying, if these religious prisoners can suffer unspeakable torture, I don't even want to go into how bad it is. It's just horrible stuff. And they keep praising God, just like, the apostles and, Peter being crucified upside down. How do they do that? Well, it's great grace and faith. None of us ever want to face that, but frankly, having met so many people, I just debase it. So Bishop Shu, he becomes I've had hearings on him. I had one a few years ago calling on Xi Jinping. Where's Bishop Shu? Where is he? What'd you do with him? It's just so religious freedom, and I've written 4 laws on religious freedom. And the original IRFA bill, International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, it went through my committee. And Frank Wolf, who's the prime author, a great guy, a champion of religious freedom. We ran into one buzzsaw after another because the Clinton administration was against it. On the record, again, I had all the hearings. Anybody wants to dispute that, I'll show you a chapter and verse where they were against it. They said by calling out countries, by sanctioning them with what we call CPC, that there would be a situation where that would be counterproductive. I said our civil rights laws work because it links it to funding and other things, whether it be name the title, women's sports, whatever. You got to have a penalty phase. And so we beat him. And Clinton did sign it, to my shock and dismay, and shock and happiness, but he did sign it. But then the mindset of the Clinton administration was always, it's not a good thing. And the last administration proved it time and again, even with Nigeria, where more Christians and Catholics are being killed than anywhere else in the world, slaughtered by the Fulani, by Boko Haram and other radical terrorists, and the government's not doing anything to stop it or to hold people to account. They should be designated CPC. And our former Secretary of State goes over to Abuja, and I've been there many times, and he says, you're not on the sanctions list anymore. So I asked him at several hearings, what criteria did you use? He has no answer. Crickets. No answer. But it is because they were against it to begin with. They don't believe in that law. In 2017, I wrote the law called the Frank Wolf. I named it after the great champion, Frank Wolf, my good friend. The Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act reauthorization. And we put all kinds of new lessons learned from 98, all those years, and it passed. It took a few years to get out of the Senate, but it is the law. And we also put entities of particular concern, not just countries. So there's all these groups that are now on, and a lot more, and a requirement that every year we get that list of sanctionable countries. Under Obama, they skipped years. So I had hearings on that. I said, it said you shall designate countries every single year, and you haven't done it. So we made it even stronger in my law. But I also working, and I mentioned this with Carl Anderson, who's a great friend. He testified. I had 7 hearings on the Chaldean Catholics and the Yazidis who are not getting any help from the Obama administration. So they would send up their top people from PRM, Population Refugee and Migration Agency, and they would be, well, we're trying, and nothing, year in and year out, nothing. So we wrote a law, and Carl helped a great deal on what should be in it. And Stephen Radish also helped, and others, and we got it passed. It became law, and that money flowed to these people who were fleeing ISIS. And to show you the mindset of in this case, it was the Obama administration, I couldn't get over to meet with them. I wanted to go to Erbil, so I finally went. And they kept putting it off. Oh, it can't happen. We can't. It's too dangerous. I said, you got little kids in these refugee camps. It's not too dangerous. So I did go. And I went with the bishop to a refugee camp. And nobody from the embassy would go because they said it's too dangerous. And I said, please, it's not too dangerous. And I'm willing to take a chance. We get there. We're met by all these wonderful kids. It was around Christmas time. And they were meeting for Mass. And the bishop spoke to them. And then they were singing Christmas carols, little fourth graders. And I'm thinking every one of them had lost a father or a mother or both. Because ISIS was brutal beyond words. And we wouldn't help them. So our law said the money's going to go directly to them. And it did. But it was not flowing to them. And Trump did implement it, and he did it very effectively.
Well, Congressman, we are so grateful to you for all the extraordinary work that you've done. And when I told somebody that I was interviewing you today, they said, he's the real deal, because you don't just fight the pro-life front on the pro-life front. You fight, you're working for against human trafficking, religious liberty. You're defending the whole person at every turn. And so we thank you so much for your time. We thank you for your work, and we'll be praying.
It's Matthew 25. We got to live it out. That's, whether it's the trafficking victim or an unborn child, that's the least of our brethren situationally. Because obviously, as I said, like Bishop Sheen says, we're all kings and queens in exile.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences here on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Betsy Fentress, and I'm delighted to have our guest, who is the director of the upcoming film, The Last Supper, and it's coming to theaters this Lent. Mauro Borelli, welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
So tell us about the movie. It is released by Pinnacle Peak Pictures, and the studio that was behind The Case for Christ and God's Not Dead. And was this timed to be released during Lent, Mauro?
It will be released on March 14.
Yes.
And with a wide release. So basically going through the Easter time, which is the proper time for this type of movie.
Yes. Tell me how you got interested in wanting to make The Last Supper.
Well, at a certain point, there was a big strike in Hollywood with all the actors, negotiating their deals and blah, blah, blah. And so Hollywood was stopped, So I say, I want to make something, a little bit on the side of Hollywood. I want to go maybe to shoot a movie in Italy, in Europe, maybe find actors that are willing to work on this, more of a passion project. So
Yes.
So the idea of doing something that was more contained, and I saw this beautiful painting of Leonardo da Vinci on the Last Supper, and I said, oh, maybe I can create something, that explore that. So I did a little research, and with my surprise, I realized that no movie have been done that only focus on this specific moment. Such an important moment, right?
Yes.
Everybody knows the Eucharistia and the covenant and what happened, at that time, but it's always been treated like as a small portion of the story of Jesus, never like an entire exploration of that. So I was very curious to know, it would be great if my audience will find out more about how the food is prepared, how the place look like, and so I did a little bit of research, and in the beginning my research was more aiming to the plausibility and the historical thing, but then got passionate by also the message, so I
Yes.
started thinking about, okay, what the food, what the Passover, what the Jewish at that time, how they were celebrating the Passover and like that. And as I do the research, of obviously because I wanted to do something accurate, not
Yes.
controversial. I want to do something that create peace in everybody's soul,
Mhm.
So I read the gospel relating to that part, and I part of the Torah as well, because it's a Jewish, tradition.
Yes.
And I start finding out things that made me very, very excited about the exploration. For example, the two aspects of the movie that they needed to be explored. One was from which point of view we're looking at this story, and what is the character arc in the story to make a film that we can follow with interest. So I figured it out that was a Peter, and then I'll tell you more about. The other one was about what is the underlying message or theme, something that I wanted to pinpoint. And I realized, like, when I was a kid, right, at elementary school, my teacher had wanted me to, go to be an altar boy. So everybody want to please the teacher. So we all go to altar boy. So I did a few times and several times. And I remember watching the communion and the Eucharistia and the words that are being said, but I never really. It's almost like something that you hear so many times, you need to really pay attention what's the deep meaning of that.
Yes, sure.
And so what I discover is that in the Jewish tradition, the Passover, during that time, it was like a honoring God and pay a death to God with the sacrifice of a lamb.
Mm-hmm.
And that lamb has to be pure. It has to be unblemished. And that blood of the lamb was put over the door. So the firstborn of every Jewish family that were doing that as a sacrifice, they were spared by the first son. The first son of the family was spared, and so that was in the Jewish tradition.
Yes.
And I realized, wait a second, Jesus blood is replacing the lamb here. So it's almost like the Jewish, they were doing this for century after Moses gave the law, right? They were sacrificing the lamb, but it's almost like if you pay a credit card and you pay the interest, but you never pay the bill. You can pay that interest. And so, well, Jesus came to pay the bill.
Jesus came to pay the bill. That's right.
He came to pay in full the debts, like it's almost like, here I am, and I'm the lamb, and I'm also like the lamb of the Jewish. I'm also pure, unblemished. Like
right.
I've been kept myself pure, and so I felt like, wow, this is an interesting. I never thought about, right, because and I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. So I try in the movie to give a glimpse of that, and given a better understanding how this sacrifice was really an amazing sacrifice that he did for us, for how the covenant changed, how this whole tradition took a turn that night.
Yeah, he replaced the old covenant with the new. Well, I had a chance to watch the screener, and there is a very poignant scene where they dip a brush, I guess made of, of a tree, and they put the lamb over the doorway in the movie. And what I thought was a really compelling character in your movie was Judas. I have never thought as much about Judas as I did during that 2 hours watching your movie. How did you try to get into the head of who Judas was? I thought that was a really fascinating part about the movie, and all of the voices in his head and the snake imagery.
Right. Well, because first of all, I'm not a big fan of a story where the bad guy is bad and he's always bad and it's caricature of being bad, and somebody's good and is always good, So I like the idea that nobody really is bad, completely bad. There's always a good part, but sometimes the event of life and this can be a metaphor of all of us, you know what I mean? Like a Peter and Judah, they're very close in this story. Judas is, he doesn't have the strength to resist the temptation. He doesn't put enough. It doesn't have the ability, or it doesn't have the help. Because, for example, there is a moment in when Peter sees Judah dead, the dead of Judah, and he goes, I fail you, which means I didn't see that you were going into the dark, and I didn't do enough to help you. It's almost like in a family. If some of our family members start to take a bad turn, we have the duty to see that and help. Because if we
Right.
don't do the effort, maybe not strong enough on his own,
Yeah.
and he fell. So Judah is the character that is being tempted, and he fell for the Satan, while Peter has the support of Jesus and the pray, and he overcome his denial, and he got restored.
Yes. You
So,
show the struggles of both of those men really, really well, I think. And especially Judas, just he was so tortured, and you really bring that out, that there was a fight for his soul, right?
Exactly. And I wish you will see the delayed scene in the movie that we don't have because the movie was too long, where you can see amazing other angle on that, which is amazing. But maybe we will do a long version of the film.
Well,
If this movie goes well, we will do another release with the longer version so you can see even more of that. It's
tell
very
us about that. What got cut out, Mauro?
for example, when it is basically so concerned about the financial,
I see.
and is bringing all the financial
Hmm.
issue, because he feels responsible for keeping all the group, working, and be able to pay for the debt, and nobody care, and he's the only one that cares. So he's obsessed with that, which is also metaphor for how money in our life, can distract us for the pure value.
Right.
Then we had a great moment where he's with Mary Magdalene, and Mary actually, we cut some of the Mary part, which was fantastic, and we will probably see on a long version later on.
Great.
But Mary Magdalene goes to the upper room and goes in the kitchen, and he reach up to the kitchen. He's going to eat something,
Mhm.
and she tells him, I think Caiaphas is is doing something here, and he tried to reassure her, said, oh, the way is safe, and then she tells him, I was at a certain point of my life, Satan was taking me, but then I found Jesus, and he kind of brought me out of that.
Yeah.
And Judah is listening to that because he just had the voice of Satan coming to him. So he's like, oh my God, there's some similarity here. And then she tell him, I think that Caiaphas has somebody in the group that is trying to do something. And Judas is shocked, and he say, no, I think he's safe. Because until the moment, he's still tortured. He doesn't know if he's going to do the betrayal or not. And so I like to see him being constantly on the edge. I think, many of us, we can find ourselves at a certain point in life on that edge of something. And
On the
then we
edge
have
of
to
something, sure.
make the right decision. So to see him bad from the beginning, I'm a traitor, it was not interesting to me, And also remember, he's part of the divine prophecy. So if he was not doing that, Jesus will not have be the sacrifice for us, so it was necessary. So it's almost like that his destiny was kind of written.
But he also tells Caiaphas that he saw Jesus walk on water. He
I love that. That's
I
my
love
favorite
that
scene.
part. That's a very powerful scene. And I want to go back to what you said about getting into the history. I really did notice there was an attention to food and to, ancient ceramics. There's a point where I don't know, is it Peter running down the stairs, and you sort of see in slow motion this pot break,
Yeah,
and he's run away
break.
because
It's a symbolic breaking of his, is that breaking of the amphor
yes,
is
the amphor, right.
is a symbolic things for the breaking of how it's broken,
Yes,
Yeah.
and because he's realized he's denied Jesus.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and this film was filmed in Morocco. Why did you pick Morocco?
Well, look, the first when I was imagining the movie, a smaller size movie, I went to Italy in because I'm from Italy originally, so and I live here for many years now. My accent looks like I just came last week, but no, I'm here for many years. Um, but I went to Italy in the south of Italy and I found some beautiful location, but they were not that right, So when I went to Morocco, we found that they have a tradition in biblical and historical movie. They did a Gladiator, they did many movies. So they have like a warehouse filled with costume, filled with props. So
Oh,
it was much
nice.
easier to, and they have the experience. But we built, when you see that set, like all the upper room, it was built that we designed. I come from art, so I designed that room, and they actually built it exactly as it was imagined, you know. And
But you say you come from art, and I saw a little short video of you uh, doing a painting after Caravaggio. It was incredibly accomplished. I mean, you are a really talented painter. Do you spend a lot of time on the side painting?
well, when I was a kid, I only thought I was going to be a painter. I didn't have idea to end up in Los Angeles and making movie. I was in Italy. I thought like my dream maybe to go to Rome. That was my maximum, And I learned from a Franciscan monk that was doing restoration. And
Really?
maybe I tell you a little anecdote that your audience may like, because this story kind of only happens in Italy, right? So I met this monk. He was a fantastic painter, and I was 7 years old, and I wanted to learn how to paint. So my father brought me to the monk and said, "Can you teach to my son?" And the monk said, "No, no, I don't want to have a kids around, blah blah blah." So it was impossible for me to take lesson because the monk was living in his world and he didn't want to deal with a student, or something like that. So one day in the church, I see a Franciscan church. I see it's Convento San Daniele. I see this big scaffolding going up to the top of the ceiling of the church. And I ask around and they say, well, they're doing a restoration of the fresco on up there. And it's who is doing the restoration? That's the monk that we like. He's a painter, so he's doing restoration.
Oh,
So I go up to the scaffolding and I see him like painting there. I was an older guy. And so when he sees me, he say, well, since you're here, why don't you go downstairs to pick up the bucket of paint for me? So I go down, I pick it up the bucket, and go back. So because I was young, I was able to go up and down from those ladders.
you're 7 years old at this time?
I was 7, 8 years old, yes.
Unbelievable.
And well, that's probably that he didn't want me I was too young for him to have worry about a kid. But because he was in this under the ceiling of the church, and there was like a 4 or 5 ramp of step ladders to do. I started to use me to go up and down to bring the brushes and the stuff. So, and after I did that several times, he said, "Well, do you want? You can do a little painting too." So he asked me to touch up some flower. They were decoration, and so since then I become his I become my master. So I spend several years going almost 2, 3 times a week in his studio to paint.
And
And so
what town in Italy was this?
that was near Vicenza and Verona, between Vicenza and Verona, in
That's an amazing
far from
story.
Venice, about from Venice. Yeah.
So there's another short film that you did on the very famous Italian shoe designer, Salvatore Ferragamo. And I read that the first pair of shoes that he made, sort of the same age when you started your apprenticeship with that Franciscan monk, and he made a pair of First Communion shoes.
Yes,
Is that true?
exactly. You know the story. Yeah, that's based the Ferragamo commissioned to me that fairy tale, and they say it's better we do as a fairy tale because we don't want we are too many family members here. Everybody has something to say about the big Salvatore, the grandfather, and say, so let's make a fairy tale so nobody complains. So I took the bio and I tried to create a nice fairy tale using the actual real story element.
Oh, I
And
watched it. It was lovely. It was a real fantasy. Oh,
yes,
there's the shoe. He's
yes,
showing me the shoe right now on Zoom.
yeah.
Fantastic.
So I had to design this, and I had to learn how to make a shoe. So I went to Florence, and I was sitting next to a shoemaker, one of the best shoemakers they have in the company, and he made a shoe in front of my eyes. Yes.
That is amazing. So both of these stories have a faith element. And did you feel that working on The Last Supper had really deepened your faith, your Catholic faith?
Yes. What he did, he gave me knowledge, that reinforce my spiritual strength. Because knowledge is, when you know what I mean? When you learn more about things, you start to really embrace it. It's learning is the process of embracing,
Yes.
So I felt like a very, very, I love the challenge, and I love I was a little bit, I didn't want to do anything offensive or wrong, so I have to think many times. Wait a second, I'm walking on a crystal, on a china shop here. You know what I mean? If I make a wrong decision or wrong things, maybe. I consult with Father John, which is a friend, here at the Beverly Hills Church, that he gave me some suggestion. He say, don't use the word heretical, use the word blasphemy. I said, okay, it's like, there's sometimes, there's little things that you want to make sure that you do right. Yeah.
And I know that you've worked with a lot of famous people in Hollywood, and I hope that you continue to make beautiful and inspirational films like you've done. And I want to just thank you for being on our show. And I want people to go and see your movie, The Last Supper, and you can visit thelastsupper.movie. Well, I did see, Mauro, that it has 30 million teaser views. So you must be excited that there's a lot of energy and hype behind the movie. And I think it's going to be a great film that a whole family can enjoy during Lent. And thank you so much for being on our Conversation with Consequences.
Well, thank you. And really, really, if you see the movie, I think you will have like uplifting spirit, sensation. We did a screening on the Chinese Theater in Hollywood, and everybody, believer and not believer, they all convey in one thing. There is an uplifting feeling at the end of joy. And I also like to dedicate this to Pope Francis, that is going through a hard time now with his illness,
That is a great way to make a prayer to him through a beautiful movie. Thank you so much, Mauro.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire, and we're happy to have with us Monsignor Roger Landry. You know him well as a member of our team that has provided exceptionally thought-provoking homilies at the end of each program. And he's joining us today to talk about the season that we're now in, which is Lent. Welcome to the show, Monsignor Landry.
Great to be with you, Ashley. Happy Lent.
So, we think of, Lent as a penitential time, and one of the greatest emblems of that is the sacrament of confession. And that's very much on my mind right now because my 7-year-old son is preparing for his first this Saturday. And he cracked me up because he came home from school yesterday and said, I toured the confessional. And so tell us, Monsignor, about why this particular sacrament is so important during this season.
St. John Paul II used to say that the most important way we grow in our Catholic faith is through the sacrament of confession. Because when we examine our conscience really well, we see where we need God's help the most. And then we come in a concrete way to be forgiven of our faults, but also to be strengthened by him in this awesome sacrament, precisely to confront those areas. Maybe it's impatience, maybe it's the way we use our tongue, maybe it's that we're lazy, maybe that we don't treat a family member the way that the family member ought. But we see that, we come to the Lord, we say, sorry to you, Lord, help me. And then he does give that help. So that's the first thing about the sacrament of confession. The second is, it was really the first thing Jesus did when he rose from the dead. Like on Easter Sunday night, he walked through the closed doors of the upper room. He said, "Peace be with you," twice. And then he was going to make the apostles peacemakers. He said, "Just as the Father sent me," we know the Father sent him as the Lamb of God to take away the sins of the world. "Just as the Father sent me, so I send you." They were only going to be able to forgive sins by God's power, so he had to give them that power. He breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." And then he set up the essential structure of the sacrament of confession. Those whose sins you forgive are forgiven. Those whose sins you retain are retained. And the only way they'd ever know which sins to forgive or retain is if people told them what their sins were. And so on Easter Sunday night, Jesus was putting into practice what he had said during the parable of the prodigal son. You remember when that son finally came home to the father's house, the father said, "My son was dead and has come back to life again." And every reconciliation is ultimately a resurrection when we come from sort of self-death through choosing, in serious cases, mortal sins, but God brings us to life in that incredible gift. So that's why not only each Lent we should make a good confession, but it's one of the reasons why we should all become apostles of confession, because we know others who are in the same situation you and I are in, Ashley, as we say at every Mass, that I have greatly sinned by my own most grievous fault. But that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is God's mercy is greater than our human misery, and that he offers it to us in the sacramental experience, the confessional closest by. So I can't wait to hear all the Lenten confessions that I have the privilege to hear as priest. I can't wait to see those lines, and I can't wait to see the happy faces as people exit.
You know, regular confession is meant to be a part of the Catholic life. And I know so many, may have fallen out of the practice. And as you say, it's lent to such a wonderful opportunity to come back home and avail themselves of that sacrament. And you've written a book called Plan of Life. And what advice do you have for Catholics who are trying to use this Lenten time to maybe become more regular about confession, to become more consistent about Mass, and just incorporating those daily practices or those important practices into their daily lives?
So the first thing I'd say about the sacrament of confession is that we go to encounter the Lord. We encounter him in his mercy. We sometimes can think that the sacrament of confession is fundamentally about our sins. The sins are part of it, but it's really about God's incredible love that he would suffer so much for us in order to take those sins away. He's paid such a precious price. So we start with his mercy. Then what we start to do is we start to examine ourselves to see those parts of our life that need to convert. We can look at conversion as eliminating a bad habit. It's far more than that. Conversion is, I'm not living the life God wants for me yet, and I need his help to do it. I need to literally turn with the Lord, convert with the Lord. I need to turn with him in all the ways that he's asking. And then we ask the Lord for the gift of sorrow. It's not just a forensic accounting of the soul when we go before a priest, but we have to be sorry for what we've done because it has negatively impacted our relationship with the Lord and with others, and often brought great disorder in ourselves. Just think about those who do drugs, for example, the disorder that happens within. And then third, we show on up after we confess with a firm purpose, we call it of amendment, of a real game plan to begin to live a new life, to exercise the opposite virtue to the vice we're confessing. And God strengthens us with his help to be faithful to that mission. And that's why every Lent is an opportunity for us to act on the words St. Paul told us on Wednesday, on Ash Wednesday in the churches. I appeal to you on behalf of God, be reconciled to God. And then he gave us the urgency of it. He said, now is the acceptable time, not tomorrow, not later on, not Good Friday. Now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. And so where God is giving us that vocation, he always gives the means. And so we should avail ourselves of the graces, not just to make a good confession this Lent, but perhaps to make the best confession of our life, because God awaits us with his merciful love. So what's holding us back?
Well, Monsignor, we thank you so much for your time today, and I'm sure we'll have many more conversations as to how we can truly make this a fruitful Lenten season for all on this journey together. Thank you, Monsignor.
I just remind everyone listening that when they see the light of the confessional on, to remember that light is on for you.
Thank you, Monsignor. And we'd like to thank all of our guests and listeners for joining us today. Make sure to follow us on social media, and as always, you go with our prayers.